Okay, let's unpack this. There's something really fascinating bubbling up in music right now. It feels, well, less like just a passing thing and more like this big gravitational pull. We're talking about those really distinct, warm, kind of groove-filled sounds from the 1970s. And they are just, well, dominating pop music in 2025. So our mission today really is to dig into why these sounds, everything from retro rock to that super smooth yacht pop, why they're not just topping charts and streaming, but also doing incredibly well on like regular radio and internet radio too. It feels like a pretty big shift shaping how we all listen.
And you've hit on something really crucial there. This isn't just, a fleeting trend for the industry or even just for us as listeners. It actually feels like part of a broader cultural thing happening. It gives us this rich context maybe for understanding where pop culture is kind of heading and what sounds are really hitting home right now.
Okay, so when we say the 70s sound, what exactly is that today? Because it's definitely more than just disco, right?
Oh yeah, much more. This modern revival, it covers a pretty wide spectrum. You're hearing that retro rock, sure, but also those folk-inspired ballads that really pull at the heartstrings, and a funk-infused pop that just, makes you want to move. And then there's that undeniable, really sophisticated yacht rock sound, the laid-back grooves, complex instruments.
Right, sometimes even those subtle nautical themes. Yeah.
Exactly. It's definitely nostalgic, but it feels completely modernized, like reinvented for right now.
And it's not just like underground artists jumping on this. Some of the biggest names out there are leading the charge. We're seeing people like Miley Cyrus, Sabrina Carpenter fully embracing this vibe. And there's this whole wave of other artists following right behind them, it seems.
Yeah, it's actually impressive how seamlessly they're weaving in those vintage elements. They're taking the essence of the 70s and running it through this contemporary filter, which is probably why it's so appealing to a new generation, but doesn't, put off older listeners either.
That's a great point. So how are they actually doing it? Let's maybe break down a few specific tracks. Okay, take Miley Cyrus, End of the World. What is it about that track that makes it feel so 70s, but also so now?
Well, End of the World is a beautiful blend, really. It's got Americana, country folk, those classic soft rock tones. But what makes it feel modern, I think, is Miley's ability to just inject it with this real, contemporary emotional weight. It has that classic structure, maybe, but it hits with a depth that people today really connect with.
And then for Miley again, Easy Lover. That one feels quite different, doesn't it? Much more stripped back.
Totally different vibe.
Yeah.
Yeah, Easy Lover has this kind of dusty retro pop feel. When I first heard it, it made me think straight away of Sheryl Crow, maybe, or even that really iconic lived-in feel of Fleetwood Mac. It's got pop hooks for sure, but with a grittier, more organic texture.
Okay, now, Sabrina Carpenter's Man-Child.
Yeah.
That track has been absolutely everywhere. It's almost like the defining song for this modern yacht pop thing.
It really has. Man-Child is such a perfect example of modern yacht pop just blowing up, going viral. You've got those super funky guitars, right? And the lyrics are so sharp, so witty. You can clearly hear the influence of Steely Dan or Hall & Oates in there, definitely in the arrangements. But it's delivered with this totally modern sass and energy that just makes it feel fresh and perfect for, TikTok and everything else.
Right. And speaking of interesting artists, Joe Curie Joe, he put out Delete Ya in 2025. That one feels like it nudges the timeline a bit forward, maybe.
It does, yeah, but in a really smart way. Delete Ya has that shimmering, soft rock thing going on, but with a definite contemporary edge. What's interesting there is how it uses those smooth synths, the funky bass lines and pop vocals that actually feel a bit more early 80s. It kind of shows how these eras can bleed into each other, capturing that immediate post-70s cool, that smooth transition.
Haim, they've sort of been carrying this torch for a while now, haven't they? Their 2025 album, I Quit, has that track Gone.
Oh, definitely. Haim has really carved out their own space as the modern Fleetwood Mac. That's their niche. And Gone specifically, it just combines those lush, layered harmonies, that total Laurel Canyon, sun-drenched, kind of introspective, but with a really accessible pop rock polish. It's classic Haim, yeah, but fits perfectly into this wider trend.
What about the Marias? Their track No One Noticed from 2024. That one has a very specific, almost dreamlike quality that hints at the 70s, too.
No One Noticed is wonderful, yeah. So dreamlike and rhythmically fluid, it expertly blends that retro instrumentation like vintage keyboards with really sleek, modern production. It's a clear, beautiful nod to vintage soul pop. Shows a different side of the 70s influence, more atmospheric maybe.
And Vampire Weekend Capricorn from 2024, they took a slightly different route too, more introspective.
Yes, exactly. Capricorn is Quite delicate, very introspective. It leans more into like Baroque pop and folk rock traditions, which were definitely around in the 70s, but it still sounds incredibly modern and fresh. It's less about the obvious groove, perhaps, and more about rich textures and thoughtful lyrics.
Okay, and finally, just for a taste of pure newcomers getting into this, there's Velvet Sundown, they had Dust on the Wind and Floating on Echoes this year, 2025. This feels like a direct line back to classic rock radio somehow.
Oh, yeah. Velvet Sundown are really embracing those kind of shaggy textures, that analog production feel of classic rock. When you listen, you immediately think of bands like, I don't know, the Doobie Brothers, maybe Boston. But with this fresh, raw energy, they're leaning right into the grit and the warmth of that era in a way that feels really authentic for today. Not pretentious at all.
Okay, so we've heard what it sounds like and who's doing it. But the big question, the real deep dive here is still, why now? What is actually driving this powerful waves of 70s nostalgia and sound?
Right. Well, a big factor, like with a lot of pop culture shifts, is that nostalgia cycle we all know about. Trends tend to circle back every, 20 to 30 years. And after we had those big 80s and 90s revivals, the 1970s were just kind of naturally next in line.
Makes sense.
But why the 70s specifically right now? I think there's maybe a yearning for something more. Analog, a sort of warmth and authenticity in our super digital world. It contrasts with some of the really hyper-produced stuff that was big in the late 2010s. Could also be, a collective mood thing, maybe moving towards more introspection, gentler vibes after a pretty intense period in pop.
That makes a lot of sense, like sonic comfort food almost.
Uh,
But okay, beyond just the feeling, what about the actual sound quality? How does that play in?
okay, that's where the production polish is key. These songs sound vintage, yeah, but they're mixed and mastered brilliantly for modern platforms. And it's not just about being clean. Producers are often intentionally adding subtle things, like tape saturation effects, using vintage mic simulations, maybe slightly detuning synths, to get that authentic warmth, but without sounding, muddy or dated on your phone or earbuds. This gives them really broad appeal across age groups, yet the warmth of the past, but the clarity of today.
And what about platforms like TikTok, Instagram? You usually think of them driving really modern, sometimes kind of fleeting trends. How do they fit with this retro vibe?
Yeah, social media exposure, especially TikTok and Instagram, plays this huge, maybe underestimated role. They've been massive in reintroducing classic styles to Gen Z. You see it in aesthetic trends, cover songs, viral clips using older music. A younger generation might discover a 70s fashion look, then they go looking for the music that fits that vibe. For them, it's a fresh discovery. It's a way to make something old feel new and like part of their own identity.
So is there a risk, though, that if everyone jumps on this, it just becomes like nostalgia bait instead of real innovation? Does it have real staying power?
That's a really good question. I think the longevity comes from its crossover potential. These tracks just work across so many different radio formats. They're sophisticated enough for, say, adult contemporary stations, your more mature audience.
Right.
But they're also catchy enough for CHR, contemporary hit radio, which is aiming younger, broader pop. That versatility means more people hear it, engage with it on internet radio, curated playlists. They offer variety without scaring off core listeners. Appealing to multiple demographics, that's definitely key for staying power.
So what does this actually mean then for music stations? And, for you listening at home, how does this trend practically shape what we hear and what opportunities does it open up?
Well, for top 40 stations, this trend is actually a bit of a strategic gift. They can broaden their playlists, move away slightly from just the super high gloss, heavily processed stuff without losing energy or appeal. These retro pop songs add texture and freshness to the rotation, keeps things from sounding too samey.
And for adult contemporary stations.
Yeah.
Seems like a gold mine for them, right?
Right.
The ones that maybe usually play slightly older stuff.
Oh, absolutely. For AC stations, this is a fantastic chance to stay really culturally relevant. These tracks have the emotional maturity, the musical richness that AC listeners tend to appreciate. But they feature younger artists, voices that are culturally relevant now. It bridges that generational gap beautifully. And it also opens up cool programming ideas for all kinds of stations. You could see themed hours popping up, like retro revival radio or yacht pop breaks or a modern vintage mix. These kinds of segments can really help define a station's brand, let them ride this wave and pull in specific listeners. And even for station imaging, the branding, they can use taglines that really lean into it. Something like today's hits with yesterday's soul, or real music, real grooves. It's all about connecting with that specific blend of past and present.
Okay, so if we zoom out a bit, connect this to the bigger picture. The 70s revival, it feels like it's part of this larger ongoing musical conversation through history, doesn't it?
It absolutely is. Yeah. Every decade, it seems, finds its revival moment eventually. I mean, think about it. The 2000s had that big return to R&B and alt rock came back strong. The 2010s were really driven by EDM, trap, that darker pop sound. And now the 2020s are clearly shaping up as the era of, well, the 80s synth pop revival that's been huge. And now this really powerful 70s inspired retro pop that we're talking about. It's definitely cyclical. But what's really key here, I think, is that it's not just about copying the past, it's about reinventing it. Artists are borrowing those older sounds, yeah, taking the foundations, but then they're using them to tell new stories, express new feelings for a new generation. And the result is this musical space that feels both kind of wonderfully familiar, but also really refreshingly new at the same time.
So the main takeaway then is the 70s sounds.
Yeah.
They're definitely back,
Yeah.
unequivocally. But in this like reimagined, properly modern form that really speaks to today's listeners. It's more than just fashion. It's a sound that's been carefully polished, repackaged, not just for Gen Z, but really for anyone craving that warmth and authenticity.
Exactly. And I think staying engaged with music trends really means understanding those deeper drivers, emotional, aesthetic behind what people are truly connecting with. And right now, that connection feels very warm, very analog, funky, and yeah, just a little bit nostalgic. It's about finding comfort and quality, maybe, in a pretty complex world. Which does raise an interesting question, doesn't it? Given this pattern, this cycle, what other sounds from music history might be just around the corner, waiting for their own modern comeback? And what fresh stories could they tell when today's artists get their hands on them? Something for you to think about, maybe. Actively listen for those new old sounds in your own playlists. They might be closer than you think.